It is such a joy and such an honor to be here. I have learned so much in just the two sessions that we've had so far. I mean, I'm sure you all will agree. It was mind-blowing yesterday, the beginning yesterday in the evening with Barbara, and then this morning. And how on earth does anyone follow what we had this morning? He's just made my task 100 times harder. This isn't a competition. But really, such a joy to be here. It's for the opportunity for me to learn as a practitioner, as much as it is for me to share with you what I have learned and what my school has learned over the last several years. And so please, I don't have any answers. I can offer you a glimpse into our journey, and that's really all I can do, is show you where we are at and what we have tried to do and why we have tried to do it, more importantly. So, I will introduce my school, or Macau first a little bit. This was Macau in 1991. A sleepy little village, small village with one or two skyscrapers in 91. And it was under the Portuguese administration. And Macau, that same view today is this. It doesn't do justice. I was trying to find a picture that actually showed all the buildings. It's become a very different city. This was it in 1964. And that same view today is this. So this is the change that's happened in the last 70, 80 years in this little tiny, sleepy little hamlet that we call Macau. Now, some of you asked me about the School of the Nations and have said, what does the School of the Nations look like? And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But the reason I put these pictures in is because this idea of character development, or this idea of developing the character of a child. The world from 1964 to now is a very different world. And yet a lot of our approaches to building character or building understanding in a child remain the same. So the question I have really is, and this is where we started, is what is the role of a school? What is the goal of a school ultimately? And as a staff, when we talk about this, our understanding is that one of the goals of the school is to prepare our children for the world that they're going to enter. Now, if we are preparing our children for the world they're going to enter, we cannot prepare them for the world in 1964. We have to prepare them for the world as it is today. And that's where our journey into investigating how do we do this, how do we build character at the School of the Nations begins. This is our school. When I joined it in 2001, we were on the 4th floor of an apartment building. It was just a series of 8 apartments that were converted. And my office was one of the toilets. So there was a desk, there was a bathtub, and there was a toilet seat. And when anyone wanted to use the toilet, I had to get up and go out of my office so they could use the toilet. Just to give you again a little bit of perspective on, of the kind of place we were. In 2005, the government gave us a piece of land, and they also gave us quite a bit of money, and we were able to construct our own purpose-built facility. And now my toilet, my office is no longer my toilet, or anyone else's toilet for that matter. We have a lot of people who may come in and cry from time to time, but they don't do anything else. Great. So, coming back to that question, what is the world that we're preparing our children for? What is it like? And the reality is, and I've put just a few things up here, there are tremendous issues in the world that our children, as they grow up into adults, are going to face, that we see and we recognize today, but very few of us are really able to do much about it. But ultimately, this world is going to be inherited by the next generation, by our children. So isn't it our role as teachers to prepare our children to deal with that world? How are we going to do that? And what is it that involves? So how do we respond? So what do we do currently? And it may be good to actually go backwards a little bit and say, so how do we approach it? There are many, many versions of character education. And each of them, I believe strongly, are rooted in truth. There's a deep kernel of truth in every one of these methods and approaches. They address one aspect or the other aspect of character education, but really rarely do they take into account the whole picture. And we felt that as we were exploring character education, that this became clear. That, just finding we tried values-based education, and it was great. We were telling a child, truthfulness is very important, honesty is very important, you want to be nonviolent, and these sorts of things. But we weren't really seeing anything change in that process. And kids would understand that, they would talk about it, we would tell them a story in class. It was wonderful. We thought we were doing a great job, but we weren't really seeing any impact. It wasn't changing the fact that that same child who talked about honesty, in the character education class, when they have a test in mathematics, has no problem looking over his shoulder and looking at the other child's test paper and responding to it. And we thought, well, this child spoke so eloquently about this idea of honesty. What happened? Why was this child not able to take that same idea and translate it into academic honesty? Or as an adult growing up into honesty in his or her own academic or economic life, That translation wasn't happening. And so it got us to think a little bit more about this. We then looked at this idea of what do we define in our world today as a good person. And what we realized is our definition, we asked our staff at school, who is this good person that we want to define? And we decided it's a person who doesn't lie, who doesn't cheat, who does no harm to other people, who is kind, but all of these things, as we were building this list of this wonderful good person, we realized that this list was very passive. This good person was someone who did nothing to the environment or to other people, just did everything to himself, kept everything to themselves. And this good individual was wonderful, but had no relationship with anybody else. It was not related to anything, to society, to anything that they saw outside. If they saw a poor person, their response was donate money, but not to look at the causes that this person is suffering, not to address the cause. It was just that, I feel better because I have given some money to this poor person who doesn't have food. And so we realized that our definition was too passive, and we needed to change the way we defined this good person. And then we came across this quote, and I wanted to share it with you, and I'll read it out if you don't mind. We cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. So what did that mean? It meant that if we just worked on simple values or virtues, if you want to call it that, that isn't going to change the environment. And in fact, we're fighting a losing battle because the environment outside is so much stronger that is going to overwhelm any virtues development that we're trying to do. And this was a moment of big realization for us as a school, that it's not enough Virtues are great, and there's nothing wrong with teaching them. There's nothing wrong with incorporating them into classes, but they don't impact things the way we want them to. So, what we realized also is that it's very fragmented. We're teaching these things in isolation from each other. So we were teaching them honesty, or we were teaching them love, as you so eloquently put it today. But we weren't looking at it in a holistic way. We weren't looking at it as, how do these things impact each other? How does love impact justice? You know, what role does detachment play? And I'll just sort of give you a little bit of an example. And as Fari was speaking earlier this morning, this example came to my mind that really, how many times have we as teachers said to a parent, "Oh, you love your child too much. You're spoiling them." I know I've said it many times to a parent who sits in front of me with their child who's just misbehaved, and we're trying to address that, and we say, you know, you haven't set any boundaries for this child, you've loved them too much. But can there be something like too much love? And, you know, as we started to think about that, we realized, no, love is a quality. Love is a spiritual quality, and there can never be anything too much you can never have too much of it. But it's the interplay between that love and these other qualities of justice and detachment that actually make this complete, make the picture more complete. And so when we say you love your child too much, what we actually mean is that you have more of this quality of love, but too little of justice and detachment. So these are all organic, these are all interrelated, they impact each other. So as teachers, in teaching this has great implication for what we do. We can't teach honesty in isolation. We cannot teach love in isolation. We cannot teach detachment in isolation, because taken to a height, each of these things actually is detrimental independently. But when they interplay, they have this effect of moderating each other and creating this person that we wanted to see. So, we came up with a new definition for a good person. We realized that this person had to have all of those wonderful qualities that we've been talking about, but they had to have it in a context. And they had to be able to apply it to their reality. So as we looked at it, we realized that if this child that we are developing at the School of the Nations is going to go out into the world and be a proactive member, not a passive member of society, we wanted to ensure that they had a twofold purpose. One was to build their own abilities and skills and qualities to the highest degree that they possibly can, but then to be able to deploy those for the benefit of society, for the benefit of others. And that was what we really came down to and said, this is now our new definition of a good person at the school. And so when you come to our school, it's one of the first things you will see as soon as you step into the school. We have a big banner right in the front that sort of proclaims this loudly as to what we define as the child who graduates from this school. What is this child going to be? And what we want to see them be. So we've sort of created our own learner profile, if you like, that when a student leaves the School of the Nations, this child will embody certain key things. And in that process, we realized that it's not good enough to just talk about the values, as I said, and so we realized we had to redefine what values are. And we call them capabilities, just to sort of distinguish them from values. And we gave it this other name, capabilities. In front of you now, you may have been some of you have been curious and have opened those little love letters that have been put in front of you. But this is actually an exercise to help illustrate what I'm talking about. And I'm going to, in a minute, ask you to open them, not just quite yet. But let's, we're in this wonderful environment, and I can't help but be inspired by the wonderful greenhouse out there and the vegetables growing all around and the greenery. I mean, our Macau, as you saw, is this wonderfully beautiful concrete jungle full of casinos and bright fluorescent lights. So for me to be out here was inspirational. So I want to explain this idea of capability by using this little activity with you. Here's a farmer, okay? Let's assume that our goal with this farmer is we want this farmer to be able to produce an excellent crop consistently, okay? We want this is the goal for this farmer. We want him to, year on year, month on month, produce excellent, high-yielding, a good quality of crop, okay? That is our goal. Now, if you open your little packets, you will see in there are a series of things. I want you to look at them all and tell me which of these would you think is the most important for a farmer to have. And it's okay if it's different. You don't have to be the same with anybody else. What of these you feel is a necessary quality for a farmer to have? Just pick one, and in a minute I'll ask you to hold it up. Yes, and I've got the director of this program sitting to my right, and he's making me very nervous. Okay, have you decided? Yes. Could you hold up the card that you've picked? Oh. There's someone there who's picked them all. Please look around and see the different colors that people are holding up as you see this. Okay? Thank you. You can put them back down. As you may have guessed, the different colors are different things, and they're not exactly the same. But let's talk about these one by one. Skills. Does a farmer need to have specific skills? Yes, absolutely. A farmer needs a series of skills if they're going to be effective, right? There are all sorts of skills. If they want, one of them may be to be able to trace and plant in a straight line in an orderly way. There may be, I'm sure you can tell me many, many more skills that a farmer should have. Being from such an urban environment, my experience with farming is very, very limited. Limited to my little potted herbs on my windowsill, actually. But yes, a farmer does need to have certain skills. Does a farmer need concepts? Yes. They need to have a deep understanding of certain concepts, right? So those skills are wonderful, but if you don't have certain key ideas or key concepts, this farmer is not going to be able to consistently provide you with that yield. Does a farmer need certain attitudes? Absolutely. Okay? So, if this farmer is too careless, and very quick in making judgments, is he going to have consistent yield? Maybe not, right? So there are certain attitudes that this farmer also has to have. Does this farmer need particular qualities? Yes. Patience is one of the biggest qualities that a farmer needs. I remember as a child planting a seed for the first time, and then just keep going and pouring water on it and saying, it won't grow. I have no idea why this seed is not growing. And I finally gave up, and I pulled the seed out, and I think I threw it away. And I went to my mom and I said, this is ridiculous. This seed wouldn't grow. I put it in the soil. She said, oh, maybe it was a bad seed. Here's another one. I put it in the soil. It still didn't do anything. But this time I forgot about it and I went away. And a week later, she called me and said, look at this little sapling that's coming out. That's your seed. So that patience was something that definitely a farmer needs to have. Okay? Does a farmer need to have particular information? Yes. So I think you see where I'm going with this. And what I'm trying to say is that it's the same with the character. If we look at characters as only those qualities, and we only work on building those qualities, we're building an incomplete picture of what this child is going to be and this child is going to do. It is that child who has that understanding of honesty, who then becomes an industrialist and pays his workers at a minimum salary to maximize his profits. Because he's honest, he will not go to a supermarket and steal something. He will pay for what he's buying, but he will not apply that to his own economic reality. It is that child who will become a scientist, who will fudge his numbers to get the results that he wants to get in his scientific inquiry or his research, right? Because he hasn't put it in context, or he or she hasn't put it in context. And so really teaching any of these things in isolation doesn't work. And the idea has to be, how is it that we mold this together? One of the things that I'm not going to talk about is how do we do that with teachers? How do you get teachers to do it? But at the same time, there's a very good question. So we did this at our school, and I want to show you the range of colors we got. If you picked up a yellow one, it's concept. If it was an orange one, it's a quality. If it was a blue one, it's a skill. If it was a red one, it's an attitude. And if it was a green one, it's information. So that's what you thought. There was someone in the back there who thought it was all. And it's what we think. It's all of them. It's all of them together that make this farmer capable of doing what he needs to do. But in our school, this was our breakdown with our teachers of what it looked like. So we use this term capability because we don't want to refer to particular skills. We see it as a much more complex interplay between many, many different things. And to understand that and to accept that is kind of important. Because if you feel that, oh, but I taught them this and I taught them that and I taught them that, why is it not happening in this particular way? It's much more complex. As teachers, we actually know this. Innately, we know this. That it's not a question of ticking off boxes that makes a child learn. But a child learns through a series of, and an interplay of so many different things that really impact and make this child who he or she is. So we then had to define what we meant by capability, and here is our definition of it. We said a capability refers to a developed capacity to think and act within a specific context in order to achieve a specific purpose. Notice how different this is from just a value. Do you recognize that in this we have inbuilt a very active individual? Right? It's the ability to think, but it's also the ability to act. It's not just good enough for them to have that quality inside them, but what they do with it and how they apply it in a context. So here's a good thing, and I'm not going to try to do this with you, but I just maybe to leave you with this to think about at some point, is that imagine for us as teachers, we want to become capable of identifying the talents of children and helping them realize their potential. If this is what we want to do, what are some of the concepts we need? What are some of the qualities that we need as teachers? What are some of the skills? What are some of those attitudes that will help us do those things? And then what is some of the information that we need? So you see how just getting any one of these things doesn't make us as educators complete either. So it's not just how we teach, but how we learn as well. So I know this is a bit heavy, and I've tried to condense a few years of work at our school into a few slides. So it may not be the easiest thing to sort of understand, and it's not my goal to try and get you to understand it, but to leave you with this idea to think about, really. And to share with you then next how we as a school have approached this and what is it that we have done. So what did this do to us as a school? It did some key things, and it changed some things significantly. And Rebecca mentioned one of those. One of those things that we realized is that having a character education class twice a week was not going to cut it. The character of a human being doesn't switch on and switch off depending on what class they're in. So if you're teaching them mathematics, you don't suddenly switch on your mathematical thinking brain, and then you switch it off, and then you turn on your scientific brain or your creative brain in different times. It's an interplay of everything. I mean, I think what's one of the most amazing things about the way Montessori approaches it is that it's such an integrated approach. And that's the key with the character as well. It's an integrated approach. So we realized very quickly that if we really want to impact the character of a child, that it has to be embedded in everything we do. When we're having a mathematics class, we have to be a character development teacher at the same time. When we're teaching English, and we're reading this story with this with this paradox that's in there, we want them to think of the moral implications of some of the things that they're reading about. When they talk about history, we need them to understand, what some of those historical decisions were and what motivated them, and how that impacts, what were some of the qualities that might have impacted that historical situation in a different way. And for them to learn from it from that perspective, it's a different way of looking at it. But it was that was one of the things that we realized that we needed to do. We also realized that we had to define these capabilities very clearly for our school. Because it's great to have these wonderful ideas, these big ideas, but if you don't turn it into anything concrete, it just remains that. It remains this wonderful idea that doesn't translate into anything that we do as a school. And so we really started to think about, okay, how do we define it? And how do we, what are the key capabilities that we want to see in our students? And so we made a list. And this is what you will see at our school when you walk in, this list of who our students are. And I'm going to read it out to you. We want our students to be seekers of truth, not just truthful, but to be people who seek out the truth. Okay? We want them to have a deep understanding of who they are as individuals and as human beings. And so we call that the knower of self. We want them to be a pursuer of excellence. We don't want them to be excellent. We want them to be pursuers of it. Okay? We want them to be committed contributors to social progress. We want them to look out into the community, see something that is not working, and to work towards changing that. We want them to be an upholder of high standards of morality. We want them to be a practitioner of moderation. We want them to be a well-wisher of humanity. And we want them to be a promoter of unity and justice. Notice how those values are embedded in here. But they are active. They're not passive values. Each of these has been embedded with an active element. So we broke it down. I'm just going to give you an example of it. This is a limited example, and the reason it's limited is because for a teacher to work with this in a broad way is also very difficult. They need something tangible to work with. So we said, for example, what is a seeker of truth? And we said the SON learner, SON is School of the Nations, learner strives to become free from prejudice, unquestioning imitation, and personal ambitions, and actively seeks to independently investigate and understand issues for themselves. This chart is a partial example of some of the things that they need. So, what are some of the attitudes that they should have? They should be truth-loving. They should be independent. They should be self-questioning. They should be humble. What are some of the qualities? Impartiality, detachment, honesty, truthfulness. So when we broke it down this way, it became much easier for our teachers to sort of say, oh, so if I work on these qualities, this is what I'm working towards. Along with that, I need to work on certain attitudes. I need to give them certain understandings. They need to have a certain set of skills. And they need to have some habits. I'm happy to share the entire list with you. You just have to tell me and I can email it to all of you. I'm very happy to give it to you. I also have it on my little stick, and if you want this, I'm very, very happy to share it. We think the more people use this and feed back to us, the more refined our work becomes as well. So I'm very happy to share this with you if you feel it's useful. Another key point is that this idea of developing understanding and values always go together. Okay, so you can't just teach values, and then you saw that in our chart, and I'll just go back to it. It's never enough to just do any one of these things, you know. And it really, if you look at these independently, we do all of these things, you know, in different ways and in different times. But it's the interplay that is important, and so bringing them together is what we found that would make the difference. And even that is not enough. Just doing that. Because until you actually make it an active process, unless students have the opportunity to practice it in action, it won't actually translate. You know, simple way of looking at it. You can't give a kindergarten student, The Hobbit and say, here, why don't you read The Hobbit? It's such a wonderful book. Everybody loves this story. Why don't you read it? They're not going to be able to. Why? Because there's a process by which they get to the point where that book becomes relevant and that book becomes readable to them. You know, as teachers, you know this. Okay? It's the same with any of these things. You can't just say, okay, we've now taught you the skills, we've given you the understanding, we've given you qualities, we've built certain habits, we've given you all of these things, now do it. Even then, it doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because if you've never done it, if you've never expressed any of those things in action, it's not going to translate. It's just not going to be anything active. So, for us at the school, on Wednesdays, the students go out into the community and they serve the community. Initially, the way we do it, and I'll give you an example, at kindergarten, we've told our children, your job is to be a loving and contributing member to your family. So our kindergarten students have a little log chart that their parents fill out for them. We don't expect them to write in them yet. And they get little smiley stickers that go with it about what it is that they're doing at home to contribute to the well-being of their family. Did they help set the dinner table? Did they help clear the dinner table? Did they pick up their toys after playing with them and put them away? That's a contribution to the family, you know. How much time did they spend with their parents that evening? What did they say to their parents that evening? All of these, so at the kindergarten level, it's expressed in that way. They get a little bit older in the primary school, and our primary students go and work with our kindergarten students. So at our recesses and our lunch times, you see our primary students, they're responsible for the little ones. We also have a special education department. And so a lot of our primary students go and spend their recess playing with the kids, with students with special needs. You know, with that autistic child who doesn't have any friends or who usually sits on his own. They'll go and sit with them and bring a board game or a picture book and talk to them and get them to participate in things. As we get older, our middle school students go out into the community and they work with the elderly. There are many homes for the elderly in Macau, and there's a growing, I don't know if you've heard about this, but in our part of the world, there's a growing aging population that isn't being supported, and our students go out to spend the afternoon at the homes for the elderly, feeding them, cleaning their beds. There's some who live in their own homes but can't go grocery shopping. Our kids will go out and do the grocery shopping for them and bring it back. And our senior students work with severely handicapped or mentally challenged people. Usually I go with that group when we go for the first time, and it's so difficult for them to sort of see the reality of some of these people's lives. But very quickly they build these bonds with these people, and you see the transformation. I need to give you a little context because I'm going to share some stories with you. Our school in Macau is a free education country, so education is free for everybody. Up to the age of 16, nobody has to pay any fees, except for 3 schools, and we're one of them. And so the students who come to us, yes, we couldn't afford it. The students that come to us are basically the most affluent in the society. So if you go to their homes, they usually have 2 or 3 maids doing everything for them. When they come to school, you see the latest Ferraris pull up outside our school to drop them off. They have chauffeur-driven cars. There's some parents who are obsessed with cars, and every month it's a different car. And that makes it difficult for us because we don't know who's coming to school. We have students who come with bodyguards because the parents are so worried about their child being kidnapped because they're so rich and people would want to do that. That's the kind of students who come to our school. And I'm just going to give you an example of some of this action, this process of action. I want to just sort of share this with you. So one Wednesday afternoon, our kids were going out, and one of these very affluent children who had recently joined the school had to go out, and he was grumbling on the bus already about having to go to some old age home and do God knows what with some people that he didn't know. And he was sort of mumbling to himself, and nobody was really paying much attention to him. So we reached this home for the elderly. And this child goes in, and he's given the task of cleaning the beds, and getting them ready, because after lunch, they're going to come back and have a nap, and the beds need to be made for these elderly. So it was a fairly innocuous role, and so I thought, I'm not going to follow him. I'm just going to go and see the other students who are working with feeding the elderly, and that's a much more challenging task because some of them can't, chew, and there are various problems, and I wanted to just make sure I was with that group. I hear this loud shrieking scream from where the bedroom areas are, shrieking, and it wouldn't stop. So I, ran across, and I thought, what happened? Did someone get injured? What happened to the... And I see this child standing there, and he'd been making the bed, and there was some snot, of this on the bed that had gotten onto his hand. And he was standing there and shaking and screaming that this was on his hand. And he didn't know what to do. And I said, look, what are you doing? Just go wash it. He's like, this is disgusting. I don't know, what is this? And how did it get on my hand? And what did these people, how do they live like this? And why do they do this on the bed? Don't they know to use a tissue? And he went on, and I was like, listen, just go wash your hand. And then after that, he refused to do anything. And he sort of just sat in a corner, and he was shaking with anger almost, It was really, and I was sort of embarrassed because we'd made a scene in this wonderful facility for the elderly, and that poor old man, had no idea what he'd done to this child, but he had reacted in such a way. Anyway, I forgot about it when we went back home. I talked to him. Every student has to write a reflection after these visits, and they have to keep a diary, and they write a reflection. This kid wrote about how horrible the experience was and how he wants to change his school because this school doesn't know what it's doing, and how it's torturing him and making him, be a servant to somebody else, and he doesn't want to do that. This child, so I do a rotation with different groups, and so I didn't go back with that group for about 6 weeks. And 6 weeks later, I was back with that same group, and we were going to the same facility. And when we got on the bus, I saw that child, and I thought, oh my God, it's that group. And so I thought, okay, I've got to keep an eye on this boy this time. I'm not going to let him go off on his own and do his own thing. And so I kind of shadowed him, and this time they assigned him the job, to my great dread, of feeding the elderly. And I thought, oh my God, if something happens here, we're just going to, we're going to have this meltdown, and I'm not sure I want to see this. So he started off okay. They wear masks when they go to the home for the elderly so that they don't infect them and things like that. And they had gloves. And it was a porridge because they can't chew, so all the food is usually porridge-like. And so it was a porridge-like thing that he had to feed. And he had a cloth, a damp cloth on the side to wipe the face afterwards, and everything was okay. So I stood in the back just watching, ready to sort of jump in if any help was needed at any time. And he started to feed this man, and everything seemed okay, and I was like, oh, this is going well. And whenever you start to relax, things just go completely the other way. And he gave this man a big mouthful, and the man had to sneeze. And he just sneezed all over our young friend. I jumped out of my seat, which was a little bit away, and started to rush towards this boy, who put his hand out to me, like this, took the cloth, cleaned the old man's face, cleaned his hands, cleaned his shirt, went and put the bowl away to get some more for him, but meanwhile washed himself up, because he was completely covered with more than just the food, and went, got the new bowl, and continued to feed him. And I sort of sat there saying, this can't be happening. This is not that really bratty kid that I had seen 6 weeks ago with the same man. And so on the way back, I decided to go and sit next to him on the bus to try and understand from his perspective what was going on. Why, 6 weeks ago, he screamed like he was going to die. And then this time, which was much worse, there was no reaction from this child. And he said to me, Mr. Nair, I realized, he said, I was screaming inside. From every cell in my body was screaming inside. But I thought, if I screamed loudly or I showed how I felt to this man, how would this man feel? To me, at that point, we have these moments as educators, don't we? When we suddenly say, everything's worth it. That was my everything's worth it moment. That was my everything was worth it. It makes me emotional even today. But it's true. That's what we live for. And that's what education does. That's what you do. That's what I do, I hope. It's just one story. There's some more. I don't know how am I doing for time? Am I okay? Okay. This is at that old age home. Just wanted to share that picture with you. This is them getting ready for lunch. Those are our students. So just to reinforce that idea, though, it's this idea of being, the idea of knowing. And when you say being, we're talking about those spiritual qualities. We're talking about those values that we've been, that this talk is really about. But it's not enough. That's the being part of what we do. Then there's the knowing. And the knowing is this specific understandings, the skills that we want them to develop. But ultimately, they only come together and turn into capabilities when you add doing, when you add that component of service, and when you have kids express that understanding in action. That's just to summarize that. Here's some other examples of our students. This is at recess. That's a child with autism. and we have one of our other students working with her. The idea is that we're not saying that this is all we want. We want every student to work towards excellence. We want them to develop their own abilities. We want them to be the best that they can be in everything that they can. But we want them to apply it, not just for themselves, but for the benefit of others, for the benefit of humanity. And if we can do that, then I think, and if we can do that as schools around the world, then really we're one step closer to transforming the world that we live in. So I told you one story. I'm going to share with you another one. I know this is something that you do here as well. Your students are your ambassadors. And when you walk out, so when parents come, prospective parents come to our school to visit, it's not me who takes them around or members of staff that take them around and show them the school. It's our students who do it. And we have this young man who is 19, but he's only in grade 8. Okay? And it was his responsibility. He's this he's not this wonderful guy. He's this interesting guy. Actually, and it comes down to a lot of what was said this morning. He comes from a family where the parents really aren't engaged with him at all. His mom, for example, gave birth to his baby brother, and then promptly took off on a vacation to Thailand and left the baby with her son to look after. And so this child wasn't coming to school for a few weeks, this young 19-year-old. Wasn't coming to school for a few weeks, and we finally called and said, "Where are you? Why aren't you coming to school?" He said, "My mom's on holiday and I need to look after my baby brother. And so that's why I'm not able to come to school." And it helped explain to us a lot of the things that we were seeing in this child. Anyway, it was his job to go and take someone around. And he took them around, and this parent asked him, "Oh, you're so articulate, you're so nice, this and that. What grade are you in?" And he said, "Oh, I'm in grade 8. He said, "Oh, but you look much older than grade 8. He said, "Yes, I'm 19. And he said, "Oh," the prospective parent said to him, "What's wrong with you? Why are you in grade 8? Shouldn't you be like graduating and in college?" And he was accompanied by another student. Who didn't say anything, and this boy said, "No, I've had some challenges. I've not been able to, keep up with studies in the same way, and so I'm in grade 8." But this other boy noticed that this child was feeling this young man, really not a child anymore, was feeling kind of bad about having to say this, and the reaction of the parent was such. So he went on Facebook that evening. Facebook, which is the bane of my existence most days at school. He went on Facebook and he found this little video, and he posted it to this boy. And I wanted to share that video with you. this other student had posted this. And then this was the response on Facebook. I don't know if it can be read. The 19-year-old writes, "There's no perfect timing or the right time to take action. It's about stepping out of our comfort zone and start working." He didn't quite get the video. And the other boy who was with him, Justin, said, "Inspiring, what you're saying is inspiring, but this is not what the video is trying to say. What this video is trying to say is that we all have the time zone we are living in. We shouldn't compare ourselves with others. Sometimes it may seem that others are faster than us, but it's just because we're in a different time zone." And so our 19-year-old says, "I think I went too emotionally." That's the young man, the 19-year-old is at the bottom over there. Then he posted his own. And Justin, the other boy who was with him, said, "It's fine, it's motivating." You know, I use Facebook as an example because Facebook is where kids express all sorts of things that we don't usually see or they don't usually say to us as adults. Sometimes my kids joke with me and say I'm stalking them on Facebook. There's some truth to that, I think. But I'm stalking them so I can see how this conversation is changing. And I have watched as so many of these students in this new approach that we've taken to character education, as the conversations they're having on Facebook have started to change, drastically change. The things that they see as important are changing on a daily basis. To me, these are the successes of I'm the first person to put my hands up and say, we have no scientific evidence that that's what's happening. I haven't done a research study. I don't have a big report to present, but I can see it on a daily basis. In the kids that I interact with as they walk into our school in the morning, on their interactions on Facebook, on their interactions within the community. Just one other story. One of the students who used to go to the elderly center, and this happened 2 weeks ago, she started to go a few months ago every day after school because she'd grown very fond of this old lady who was there and who kept telling her that her children don't come to visit her anymore at this old age home. So she's made it a point to go every single day after school and spend an hour or two with this lady. And she takes cards because this lady likes to play cards, and she plays cards with her. And then 2 weeks ago, the old lady passed away. And this child was devastated because she felt she'd lost a member of her family. It was very hard for us at school to see her, and her students, her classmates were saying, "She's not your family." And she's like, "No, she is my family. She's as much family to me as all of you are." And we're starting to see these constantly, these little examples popping up in our school constantly as we go through the day. When I wake up in the morning, I thank the Creator that I have this job, that allows me to do these amazing things and work with these young people in this way. And I'm sure all of you sitting here feel the same way about education as I do. And really, in sharing all of this with you, it's my deep desire that, if you take nothing away from this, you take back with you the inspiration that what you do changes lives, changes futures, and changes the destiny of our planet as a whole. So thank you for what you do. Thank you so much for bearing with me this morning and afternoon now. Thank you very much. Thank you.